So it's about that time of year when some of us photographers start thinking to ourselves, we should really create a calendar. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the different steps that I've taken to create my calendar. Speaking of which...
Oh, sweet baby Jesus, here comes the commercial.
This is my calendar. Obviously, I've created a calendar. If you're interested in pre-ordering this guy, you can do so. I'll just leave a link down below. You can go to my website and pre-order a signed copy of my calendar. But in today's video, we're going to talk about how to create your own calendar. So you could argue one of the most difficult parts of creating a calendar is choosing the images. Now, with a little bit of forethought, you could probably do it a lot better than I've done it. I haven't done it my own calendar in like 6 years. I think I've only done one other calendar in my entire photographic whatever. So it was definitely time for me to do one, and I had 7 years of images to go through to select from. And basically I needed a theme of some kind. So because I live in the Pacific Northwest, I wanted to create something that focused on the types of images that I create probably the most often. So I focused on obviously the western states of the United States, and I just kind of cherry picked some of my favorite images, but also images that kind of portrayed the month. The way that I often organize all of my images is kind of by region. I catalog inside of Lightroom, and then once I do an edit and I export for the web, I put those into a Google Drive folder that's kind of organized by region. So, for example, I have a Pacific Northwest folder with all of my different Pacific Northwest images, and these are all like, web-sized images. So what I did was I went through the appropriate folders and just kind of found images that I felt matched the feel for each month. Also, another thing that I did was I wanted to use vertically oriented images, portrait oriented images, just so they, when you hang it on the wall, they looked a little bit bigger. Plus, it's kind of different than a lot of people choose to do their calendars. A lot of calendars are landscape oriented. I wanted to go vertically oriented, which, there's a trade-off. Unfortunately, it doesn't leave much room for the actual calendar part of the calendar, but most people use the calendars on their phones these days anyway. It's more about the images. So I would go through and I would find an image like this one that I liked. But the problem is all of these were processed with, posting to the web in mind. You have to kind of re-edit a little bit when you're going to be printing something. So let me show you some of the things that I do for images that are going to print as opposed to the web. So the first step, once you've chosen the image that that's going to make it into your calendar, is you have to find it in your Lightroom catalog. I wish that I was more organized than I am. Most of my images are organized by dates. Some are organized by trips and locations and workshops, that kind of thing. But some of my older work like this is from 2017, it's just by date. So once I've located an image, the next thing is I need to open it up inside of Photoshop and do some tweaks. So I'm going to right click, select edit in Photoshop 2020. Now this is going to give me the option of editing a copy with Lightroom adjustments, editing a copy, or editing the original. I want to edit the original because when I saved this initially after doing my initial edit, I saved it as a TIFF file with all of my layers intact. That's a really important thing to make sure that you do because, our tastes change over time. If it's an image that I, maybe over edited, now I could go in, I could change the opacity of some of my layers. If I felt like I overdid something, I can go in and I can fix all of that. But saving all of your layers is very important for the future. This particular edit, I don't feel like I overdid a lot of things, but there's definitely some things that we need to change before we send this over to print. For example, when I process a lot of my images that are going to the web, they tend to be a lot more contrasty and a lot darker because they're going to be seen on a backlit, bright little device. When something goes to the print, you don't have the luxury of it being backlit and super bright. So one of the first things I like to do is change my background to either a light gray or a white. So by changing this to a light gray, this is going to be a more accurate depiction of what it's going to look like up on the wall. Another thing that I really need to keep in mind is I need to look at my histogram and see how dark the dark portions of my shot are, how close they're getting to being blocked up. One of the things that I really like to do when I send things to print is to move that left side of the histogram well off the edge. That way people can actually see into those shadows. So one of the easiest ways to do that is I'm just going to go down, create a new curves adjustment layer. And then I'm just going to grab the left side of this curve and bring it up about 7-8 points, something like that. So if I zoom in here and do a before and after, it's going to essentially just open up those shadows a bit more. It's not going to allow the darkest tones to go all the way to black, and that's going to look a whole lot better for print. A lot of times, my images, that's about all they need in order to go to print. It's that left side of the histogram that I really need to protect. I don't need to brighten the entire image. I don't need to brighten the highlights. Mostly just need to open up those shadows a bit more. That way those shadows don't go all the way to black in our prints. One of the other things that you really need to do different before you send stuff off to print is you need to sharpen with print in mind. So a lot of times when you're posting to the web, you need to be really aggressive with the amount of sharpening you do. Oftentimes I will either use TK actions to sharpen for the web, or I also have a really awesome extension called the Web Sharpener extension panel, and it is just sharpening for the web. These are really powerful one-click solutions for sharpening, and often very aggressively when you're posting to the web. But when you're going for print, people are going to be looking at your print really close. So if you have any kind of over-sharpening artifacts, you're not going to get away with it in a print like you would on the web, because for when you're going to, something's going to the web, it's going to be seen this big. When it's going to print, it's going to be seen often much larger. So you need to be not only more cautious about the amount of sharpening, but you need to be more cautious about where that sharpening goes. The way I like to sharpen for most of my prints is I will create a merge visible layer, Control-Shift-Alt-E or Command-Option-Shift-E. That creates this layer here. This is a merge visible layer. It's the current state of our photo on its own pixel layer. And now I'm just going to go up to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. Smart Sharpen is a way of sharpening intelligently, where it's trying to only sharpen what it thinks that you want to sharpen. We've got this 100% zoom window here. I'm going to drag this around to some of the details. When I click down, it gives me a before. When I release, it gives me an after. I'm going to turn up my amount just a little bit more because we're going to mask some of this stuff in. So I'm going to crank it up, maybe 300%, go before, after, drag it around to some of the water areas, before, after. I think it looks pretty good. The sharpening settings that I have here is I have a very small radius. This is 0.7 pixels. If I go with a large radius, it starts to look not only over sharpened, but it starts to look kind of like a high pass clarity type sharpening. I really don't like that. I like to keep my radius nice and small. So somewhere about around 0.7, 0.8 pixels, something like that. Let's go to 0.8. So now we have this sharpened layer here, before, after. At this stage, I like to zoom around my image, go all the way in to at least 100%, and kind of look and see if I can find any artifacts that's being created or any areas that does not look good. This type of image, honestly, you can hit it with quite a bit of sharpening and it's not going to have any of those nasty artifacts that you might get in a different type of image where you have a big open sky or something like that. Honestly, we don't really need to mask much out here, but I want to show you one of the ways that I like to be a little bit more aggressive with the sharpening, but make sure that we're not getting any nasty artifacts. And the easiest way, honestly, is just to mask out some of the brightest highlights. Because if we get those over-sharpened artifacts, a lot of times that's going to create these really abnormally bright highlights around contrast areas. So the easiest way to get rid of those is we'll just create a luminosity mask that eliminates those. So I'm going to create a luminosity mask that masks out some of the brightest highlights. So we want everything except for those brightest highlights. The easiest way in Lumenzia is to hit this not button, which means that when we hit a lights 4 or a 3, for example, it's going to allow everything except for those brightest highlights to pop through. So if I hit the not button and then a lights 3, stick with me here, it's going to mask out only the brightest highlights, which are going to be the only places that we might get a little bit of weird artifacting. If I hit lights 4, it's going to get more restrictive. And I think something like this is probably what we want for this layer. It's just going to mask out the very brightest highlights. That way, any of those artifacts we might have created are getting masked out. So I'm going to apply this as a layer mask to our sharpening layer. And now when we zoom in, before, after, this is what our layer mask looks like. It's allowing it to come through in the majority of the shot, but masking out some of those brightest highlights around the contrast areas. So at this point, we're ready to export for print. And the way I like to export for prints is I just go up to File, Export, Export As. And now this is going to be an important set of settings. So I'm going to export as a JPEG. JPEGs are often just fine for sending to print unless your print lab likes to have the layers available to tweak. Some really high-end print labs like Nevada Art Printers will prefer that. Otherwise, JPEG is just fine. I'm going to embed the color profile, and I am going to not convert to sRGB. If we convert to sRGB, we're throwing away some of our color. Now, this is going to vary from print lab to print lab, but Bay Photo, which is the print lab I'm going to be sending this to, accepts up to Adobe RGB. So we're not going to convert to sRGB because that would be throwing away some of our color information. Instead, I'm going to embed our color profile. And because these are only going to a calendar-sized image, I'm not going to blow this up in any way. We don't need to do that. So now we've exported for the web. Now, let's talk about print labs. So the print lab that I've chosen, and I am in no way affiliated with them, I've used them a lot in the past, and that's why I chose to use them for these, is called Bay Photo. You can just go to bayphoto.com. They have really excellent large prints. You know, I've used them for acrylics and metal prints, all kinds of things. And that's why I chose this print lab, is because I know that they print very high quality. Now, the cost of this particular calendar that I'm printing is actually pretty expensive. It's costing me like $18 each, which is not ideal. I know there's more affordable calendar print labs out there. If you find a good one in America, let me know. But I went with these guys because I wanted a really high quality print. And, you know, now that I've gotten my test copy back, that's what this is, I'm very happy with the results. So one of the most important things is that you need to order one print, test. So order just a one-off copy. That way you can check all of your edits, make sure there's no weird artifacts or anything in there, make sure that it all looks good before you do that big batch edit. That's a very important step. So the way Bay Photo works is that if we go over to this is their rows system. So when you're creating a print order, basically there's this program that they provide when you create an account with them, where you can go up here and you can select all your different, I can go to this is a January 2021 template. It's going to look like this. I can go to where my photo is, and I can literally just drag and drop. So I'm going to take my file, drop it onto our calendar, reposition it. I could even rescale it, whatever. And then I have some print options. For these, I chose to do a UV coated cover, which is why this cover is so shiny. It just gives it a little extra gloss. And then the rest of the pages are just a normal print paper. You could do metallic, you could do pearl paper, you can do all kinds of things with them. I chose to just kind of stick with a standard paper and then do a UV coating on the front. Also, when I did my cover, I did all of these text graphics myself in Photoshop, just because I felt like I could do a better job than their rows system. So once you load your image, you just add it to your cart, you go over to your cart, and then you have all your different months here. You can see what it's costing me per page. And then you have a few different options. You can have them like color corrected. I never recommend doing that. You should be doing that yourself. Obviously, we're spending a lot of time editing it. But the most important things to make sure that you're doing on your end is that you're calibrating your monitor You need to be working off a calibrated monitor. It calibrates for color. You need to make sure that you're not processing on a really bright monitor. Otherwise, all of your prints are going to come out very dark. You want to really bring the brightness down, and the ambient light in your editing office is incredibly important. You want to make sure that, like I am right now, unfortunately, that you're not editing in the dark. You know, when you're editing in a dark room, your image is going to appear much brighter to you because it's on a bright monitor. So you want to have some ambient light in your room, keep it fairly consistent, make sure that you're calibrating for color and that you don't have your monitor too terribly bright. So at this point, I'm going to submit my order, and that's pretty much it. You know, there's a lot of print labs out there. You just need to make sure that you order a test sample and actually test the quality. And you need to go through and you need to process each of your images for print rather than for the web. Because I edit a whole lot darker for things that are going just onto Instagram or something. I edit those images a lot darker than I send to print. I open those shadows up a whole lot when I send to print because I want people to be able to see in them. I don't want my shadows to be blocked up. And that means getting that left side of the histogram way off that left edge. Hopefully this has helped you guys. Make sure that if you're interested in supporting me, you can go over and pre-order a signed copy of my calendar, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy, everybody.